Hi, and welcome to another edition of the NAIC Insights Series. I'm your host, Bob Green, and I am delighted to be joined today by New York State Comptroller Thomas DiNapoli. Welcome, Mr. Controller.
Thank you, Bob. So glad to have this conversation with you.
You as well. You as well. Let's jump right in. For those that are not familiar with your job and your role, please describe what you do and what you're responsible for as Controller for the state of New York.
Sure. I'll try to do it quick because, in New York, we've managed to have the controller's office be in charge of a lot of different responsibilities. People know us for different things, sometimes don't appreciate the breadth and depth of what we do. Obviously, for the purpose of our conversation, most folks know that I serve as trustee for the New York Common Retirement Fund. And in New York, which is not unique, but there are only two other states that have set up as a sole fiduciary structure. So that's obviously a very important responsibility, both in terms of investing money to fund the pensions, but also the benefit administration side. So, we have 1.2 million members, about $268 billion pension fund. So that's obviously a very important responsibility. But the controller in New York also serves as the chief fiscal officer, as the chief auditor for the state as well. So we don't obviously set the budget. That's up to the governor and the legislature, but we review the budget, make comment on it. We make recommendations on state fiscal practices. We play some role in debt management. We do the payroll for the state. We approve contracts, payments. So if you're a vendor, a business, a nonprofit, a local government that's getting a state grant, all of that, flows through us. And that audit function, Bob, is a big responsibility. So auditing state agencies, public authorities, local governments, counties, towns, cities, villages, school districts, special districts. We're kind of that independent voice and set of eyes to make recommendations on how government could be more efficient. And worst case scenario, when we find people doing wrong, ripping off taxpayers, we have an investigative division that works with district attorneys and the attorney general's office and U.S. attorneys, law enforcement, hold people accountable. And our collaborative efforts, result in public officials or appointed officials using public money in the worst case scenario, sometimes having to go to prison, and then we fight for restitution of taxpayer money. A few other miscellaneous things we do. We help administer the oil spill fund. We manage the 529 college savings program, the 529 ABLE program for people with disabilities. I'm sure. Then we have obviously a policy division that issues reports and various timely issues to inform the public debate and discussion. And then we have a separate office just for New York City that comes out of the New York City fiscal crisis of the 70s that focuses on New York City finances, MTA, Metropolitan Transportation Authority. So it's 2,800 employees. So besides being an elected official, I have to run an agency, and very proud of the team we have. But, the job I have in other states very often is divided up. Usually it's a state treasurer, state auditor, maybe a controller. Sometimes they're separate. In New York, they've all been put together in addition to that role of being sole fiduciary for the pension fund.
Well, in a state where money is probably paramount, right? You don't go to New York State, New York City without focusing on money and Wall Street and all the investment managers. It's pretty fair to say that you've got one of the most important jobs and one of the highest profile positions. And if I may be so bold, I think personally you've done an exceptional job. How long have you been in the role now, Tom?
Well, thank you for those comments, but it's hard to believe that this is my 17th year. So in New York, we've had a pretty consistent revolving door as far as state officials going back. A lot of folks got into trouble over the years, unfortunately. But I'm not the longest serving controller. Actually, Arthur Levitt served for some 24 years. So I'm the second longest serving. But I think we do have a lot of responsibility, but in some ways, counterintuitive to what we do. It's not as high a profile position in New York as you might think it should be. And I always say to my folks, we may not be on the front page of the paper every day, but that's because we're doing our job. And from my perspective, as someone who's been in public life for a long time, I like getting the work done.
Mhm.
I've never been one to focus on, the PR side of things. Maybe sometimes to my detriment, I don't know. But I say, we're in many ways the back office operation, the nuts and bolts of state government. And through all the changes, all the different governors and other elected officials that have come and gone, we've been a source of stability.
Yeah.
And I think that's important for the role of controller, given the role with finances, given the role of looking out for the retirement security of our members. I'm very comfortable, with that role, and I think, I think and I say that very directly, the team is doing a great job. I get sometimes too much of the credit for our successes. It really is a team effort, and I'm very proud of the people that work for the Office of the State Controller.
Yeah, the team that you've assembled, I have had the pleasure of serving with 3 CIOs that you've hired. All of them have been outstanding, and ironically, all of them have been women. Let's start there, right? It's you and I both know we're going to talk a lot about diversity, but diversity really starts with who you choose, right? Who you give opportunities to. Talk a little bit about what I would submit might be some of the most critical hires you've made and the types of people that you've empowered to do those jobs.
I mean, there's no question as far as pension fund management, the chief investment officer is key. Really at 2 levels, Bob. The title, I always say this when we've interviewed people for the job, the title is chief investment officer, but it's as much about managing people and the process as it is about investment smarts. So I have to say, because in 2 out of 3 of those hires, we used a search firm. We were looking for the best and the brightest. And for the third individual, it ended up being an internal promotion. It just so happened that the best and the brightest that were available happened to be women. 2 out of the 3 of those women have been Black women. And each of them have brought their own style, their own skill, their own expertise. But what obviously has been key is my comfort level as the trustee, for the fund, that I would be able to hire people that have the same, if I could call it worldview, that I do, in terms of not only getting good results, which obviously is our prime goal, right? We have to make decisions for the benefit of the members, but also understand that when you're moving capital, especially the amount of capital that we're moving, that you want to be able to say good things are happening besides, making money, for the fund. So, when I first came into office, very much on a learning curve, obviously for me, I was very fortunate. Rodlin ATN was our first chief investment officer, and Rodlin particularly, and I know we'll get into more detail in terms of how we've managed the fund with regard to emerging managers and women minority-owned firms. But Rodlin really was so supportive of our really elevating that initiative. There had been seeds of it already planted, starting with one of my predecessors, Cole McCall, who I think Bob, a great controller in New York history. And then Vicki Fuller. When Rodlin decided to move on, Vicki Fuller, again, did an outstanding job, really supported, nurtured, and helped us grew the fund overall, but also to really expand our effort as far as emerging managers and MWB firms. And then our deputy to Vicki, Anastasia Turtichuk, when Vicki moved on. By the way, Rodlin and Vicki could have stayed. It was their choice. I want to make that clear. They wanted to do some other things. Anastasia had been Vicki's deputy, and Vicki actually had created that role of deputy CIO. So it was really a smooth transition to Anastasia, and she has continued supporting my view of not just, again, getting good results, strong results, but how we go about managing our money, where we put it, where we don't put it. All that's important as well.
Yeah, no, look, the CIOs have been outstanding. The broader team that we work with, folks like Joe Dawson and your chief diversity officers, Sylvester McLaren, and even prior to that, I'm going to say his name because he he'd be so disappointed if I didn't. But we work very closely with AJ Hernandez as well. You have assembled a great team. You have assembled a very diverse team, and they've served your beneficiaries and your constituents extremely well.
Yeah, no, if Bob, if you're going to mention AJ, there's always a little competition there. We have to mention Tyson Pratcher, because Tyson was the originator of that platform within our organization.
I can't thank you enough, because I'm really trying to manage my emails after this call. Tyson would have roasted me if I hadn't mentioned him. So let's put Tyson in the bunch. Absolutely outstanding as well. So appreciate all of them and their contributions. Let's go back. I think a lot of us have had the opportunity to hear from you and your team about New York Common and the investment strategy and the programs. But what from time to time doesn't really come up is your background. If you don't mind me saying, you were an unlikely candidate, perhaps, for becoming controller. I know you had a long career in politics as an assemblyman, and before that, give the audience a bit of your background, Tom, and tell us how you came to the job.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, I served as a legislator in the state assembly for 2 decades, and I guess I'll go even further back in terms of how I first got involved. I mean, I'm very much a kid who came of age in the late 60s, early 70s, so. All of what was happening and churning, civil rights movement, anti-war movement, environmental movement, women's movement, beginning of the gay liberation movement, as it was called back then, all those social movements, farm worker rights, had a big impact on me. I grew up in a pretty conservative community, pretty conservative household, but, the voices of folks like Martin Luther King and the Kennedy brothers really resonated within me. And so I always wanted to be involved. And my earliest involvement was running for a seat on our local Board of Education. I had been involved with school issues. I was the kid who was the president of the high school and all that. And I wanted to see some real changes locally. So I had the unique opportunity, Bob, of running for Board of Education. We elect them out on Long Island. I was 18. I was still a senior in high school. I hadn't quite graduated yet. And, so my first vote ever was for myself, which is a weird thing to be able to say. And I not only ran, but I won, became the first 18-year-old elected to anything in New York State. And that experience of being on the Board of Education really is and the Board of Education is not a political, partisan, position, but it certainly launched me into greater involvement in the larger community. Ended up getting involved with Democratic politics, had the chance to run for state assembly, worked part-time for a congressman along the way. I did the work for 10 years in the private sector. I worked in telecommunications for 10 years, but I always wanted to do public service full-time. So when I had the opportunity to serve in the assembly, I was pleased that I got nominated and I won. And I focused on a lot of different issues, especially education and environmental issues for 5 years. Prior to being controller, I chaired the Environment Committee. But I also chaired the Local Governments Committee, Government Operations. I was on the Ways and Means Committee, the Finance Committee for about 15 years. So, the unlikeliness of me becoming controller had to do with the strange circumstances. As you recall, my predecessor got into some trouble and had to resign. Ultimately, the troubles expanded to how the pension fund was managed and got into even more trouble later on. But there was a vacancy in the office. So you had this strange circumstance where when there's a resignation and a vacancy, the state legislature, sitting as a unicameral body, the Senate and the Assembly, choose who the person will be to fill out the remainder of the controller's term of office. So being in the legislature, and I guess someone who was respected by my colleagues, it was not without some controversy and battle, but I did benefit from bipartisan support to become state controller. But I will say this, in New York, when you look at the history of who the controllers have been, Alan Hevesy, he had been city controller, but he was in the state assembly. We served together before that. Carl McCall had been a state senator. Ned Regan was a county exec. Arthur Levitt, who served for so long, was a president of the Board of Education in New York City. And you go back into the 50s, the controllers had been state senators or assembly people. So, sometimes people think, well, it's got to be a Wall Street person to be the controller. The controller is really the public official, elected official, who makes sure that the professionals, the smart investment people you hire, the smart auditors you hire, the smart budget people you hire, the smart IT and operations people, that they're doing their jobs and they're doing it with a sense of integrity and transparency. So it's really a management job ultimately. So what I always like to say, Bob, because I got my master's degree in human resources management, actually, and I did management in the private sector before I became a legislator. I actually did have more preparation than some people at times have acknowledged. But there's no doubt that, from my perspective, the lessons I learned being in the legislature, particularly when it comes to transparency and accountability, that to me has been key. Because this job ultimately, I'll end answering the question on this note. People sometimes say, what's the main qualification? Should you be a CPA? Should you have Wall Street experience? The main quality is to be independent. The controller in New York is independently elected with a lot of responsibility, so that the controller is not beholden to the governor, beholden to the legislature. And because this is the office, particularly with that audit function, that really focuses on transparency and accountability, the tradition for this office, whether it's been a Republican or Democrat, is to really look at things with the big picture in mind. It is the least partisan of all the offices. That's how it should be. And that's really how you derive your credibility, by calling the shots as you see them and being independent. And hopefully, as long as I could stay true with that, I'll be in the office for a bit longer.
Well, what I think a lot of people don't understand and focus on, particularly the further they get away from the asset management industry, is more than the dollars. You have the livelihood of millions of people in your hands, people who serve the state of New York in various capacities. And this I don't want to impugn it and say arcane, but this notion of a sole trustee, right? That is a very that governance structure has a long legacy, but you really do singularly, 2,800 employees notwithstanding, you singularly bear the responsibility for the success, and I won't say failure, but the success of the plan, right? Talk about the burden and the responsibility you carry and how you approach that in your daily walk.
I mean, it's a daunting responsibility. Again, when you keep in mind at the beginning of my tenure, although my predecessor had already resigned, there was an ongoing investigation that really uncovered tremendous malfeasance and self-dealing with management of the pension fund. So I really had an outsized burden to prove that this structure, in fact, could work. And let me say this in terms of sole trustee versus a board. And you're right, most structures have a board structure. Some of the issues that happen at New York Common have happened in funds that have boards as well. Sure. At the end of the day, I think it's less the structure that matters. What really matters is the people. You could have a board member that could be getting favors, for making a vote on a certain investment. You've seen that, in situations across the country. So the challenge from the beginning was, and it's still a challenge. It's an everyday challenge because organizations change, people come and go. We even mentioned, 3 different CIOs and go down the rest of the organization. We've had a big turnover, obviously, over 17 years. So when new people come in, you have to make sure that they're the right people. They understand the values, they understand ethics, and you have to have the checks and balances. First of all, on me, as the trustee and the one who, particularly with the private market investments, that ultimately does the sign off on the private equity investments in real estate, infrastructure, and so on. So what we did from the beginning is we set up 2 task forces, one that looked at the management side broadly, and the other that focused on the pension fund, and really said we have to have more internal structures so that before the controller, as the ultimate signs off, that in fact you've had multiple staff reviews that have been documented. In the case of particularly the private markets, you've got external consultants that are signing off as well. We have independent advisory committees, right? So we do have committees. We have an investment advisory committee that frankly we revitalized, and we structure it now with an independent chair that didn't exist before. And these are individuals who have expertise in different areas of investment. They meet about 6 times a year. They guide the staff. They guide me on investment strategy. They particularly review our asset allocation. We have a real estate advisory committee that's statutory, that meets monthly and actually votes on real estate transactions. I can't sign off on a real estate transaction unless this committee approves it. So in effect, we have a board of trustees for real estate. It goes back to New York law, I think, going back in the 60s or 70s. And then we have another committee of actuaries that reviews our actuary report, which goes into deciding the contribution rate that we charge the government employers. And then we have a broad advisory council with all the stakeholders, government, labor, and so on, that also meets periodically to give us input. So we have internal checks, we have external reviews, and then we try to put the information out there. In addition to the annual report that any pension fund has to do, what we instituted, again, with transparency and from recommendations from our reform committee, we post our transactions on a monthly basis, so people know what we're doing, and we have quarterly reporting of our fund results. It used to be once a year you'd find out the results, and you'd get the big document at the end of the year, and you'd have to hunt and peck and see where what's being invested where. We still do that, but by doing those monthly transaction reports, there's an immediacy with people knowing where our money is. So getting information out there, having all these internal reviews and checks. Ultimately, though, it's still the quality of the people you have working with you, whether it's your own staff or the people you retain as consultants and advisors. And you always have to be vigilant. People are not perfect. That may not be a news flash to you, Bob, but I've learned the hard way that even sometimes good people could do the wrong thing, and so you really always have to be on top of the game of that. And we do very regular ethics training, refreshers for everyone, even for people on the committees, financial disclosure. People know who to call if they have any question, about anything they're doing, to make sure they're doing it right. So all of that's very important to try to keep us not only effective but honest.
So let's jump into the nitty gritty. So you have 268 billion in assets. I appreciate you sharing with me that your funded status is 93%. And for our audience that isn't aware of how pension funds measure themselves, that means that in a long run actuarial analysis, you have enough resources today to cover 93% of the obligations within the future, right? So by most, it's not 100%, but by most standards, anything above 80% is doing really, really well. Right.
Yeah.
It wasn't always like that. As you mentioned before, you came in a very difficult time. What have you done over 17 years, Tom, to align and basically arrive at a place where you're 93% funded, and for all intents and purposes, the plan has done outstanding? How did you arrive there as the controller?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do have to say, even prior to my getting there, New York was always in much better shape than most state plans. Mm-hmm. Of course, shortly after I became controller, a little thing happened called the global financial crisis, where we lost, about 26% value of the fund in 1 year. Mm-hmm. So, I think it'd be fair to say, again, with tremendous guidance from staff and all of our CIOs, we don't panic. The most important thing you do is your asset allocation, and you have to have confidence in that. And obviously, as any institutional investor, we have a diversified portfolio. Biggest allocation is to public equity, but because of the volatility in the public markets, we've continued to diversify, particularly in terms of private markets. And as you know, and as we've talked about, we've actually increased our allocation the last go around a bit more to private equity and to real estate. So I think that diversity and bringing more of private market investment opportunity has been part of the answer. Not panicking. So COVID, was the other big event,
Yep.
which at least in the short run created problems. So, not panicking. And also, I have to say, a lesson learned during the global financial crisis is maybe we didn't panic, but we probably held back a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And we might have missed some opportunities because everybody was concerned about, the world's, collapsing around us. What do we do? Maybe it's better not to do too much new investment. I think what we learned from then is don't miss opportunities, even in what may seem to be a down cycle, because years later, you don't want to miss out on some of the good vintages that may come out of even the times of dislocation. So coming out of the COVID years, whatever you would define it, we didn't stop in terms of making investment choices. But I think it really gets back to staff, CIO and the rest of the staff, and understanding the importance of manager selection.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where our process has been very rigorous. Look, every decision that you make, does it always come out as strong as you would hope? No, obviously not. Some perform even better than you might have expected.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing that we've done, so here's a context of that 93%.
Mm-hmm.
Our another number to throw out, Bob, our long-term assumed rate of return, right? The long-term goal of what we think we're going to achieve is 5.9%
Mm-hmm.
over time. Now, I think there are only 2 other public pension plans in the country that are 6% or below.
Mm-hmm.
So we start out with a more conservative perspective, and I think that positions us well. So if you look at some of the pension plans that be similarly funded, or maybe even a little better, if they're, let's say, at a 7% assumed rate of return, if you instead put a 5.9% on them, you'd see that they're not quite looking as strong as the numbers may suggest. So I think being a bit more conservative in terms of our assumptions, manager selection, having confidence in our asset allocation and sticking with it. When there's volatility and things happen, do you sometimes make some slight tactical moves? Sure.
Mm-hmm.
But we're a big ship.
Yep.
We don't steer too quickly anyway. So we really don't panic when times get tough. So our fiscal year ends March 31st. So this year we had an 11.5% positive return. Obviously a good year for us.
An excellent year. I'll draw a comparison. I was chairman of a Mid-Atlantic large public pension plan, and our board and legislature would never go below 7%. Right, most of the time we were 7.5% or 8%, and they didn't want to do it, as you know, for fiscal reasons. They didn't want to have to draw upon contribution rates or even other block funding from the legislature. So for you guys to be down at 5.9% says a lot about how conservatively you're running the plan.
I'll just mention on that. It's interesting because when everything ramped up really quickly when COVID was starting to be in the rearview mirror, we actually had a 33% return that year.
Yeah.
I said to everybody, don't expect us to do that again. And it was very tempting to just put the money back to cut contribution rates.
Yeah.
But that was really, working with our actuary, we said, you know what, we can cut rates. Yeah. But now's also the time to cut our assumed rate of return. Let's take some of those gains and instead put it to use with a more realistic assumed rate of return that'll position us well for the future. And I think that was a smart decision.
Yeah. So I think it was General Patton that said anybody can look like a good general when there's no war. You have had 2, I don't know if we want to call them wars, but battles. You had the Great Recession and you had COVID. You mentioned both of them. Yeah. Contrast the challenges and what you learned uniquely from each of those. What did you learn from the Great Recession, and what did you learn from COVID?
Well, I'll start with COVID. COVID just came out of nowhere. If you ever would have told me that I'd lived through a pandemic and a health crisis that ground everything to a halt, I would have said that's like a science fiction movie. So, I guess that was a very hard lesson that what you least may expect, can happen. and be better prepared. Again, that gets back to part of what informed our lowering that assumed rate of return as much as we did. I'd say the challenge of the Great Recession and the global financial crisis is being reminded that there are always going to be economic cycles. Back around 2000, the fund was doing really well. Contribution rates were incredibly low from the employers, and the fund enhanced benefits. We did changes. I won't get into the details, but in New York we have these tiers, depending on when you join the retirement system. So we made those benefits more generous. We put a cost of living adjustment automatic for retirees. And what happened within about a year of those enhancements, the dot-com bubble burst, 9/11 happened, and the fund lost money, and the contribution rates spiked up significantly. So, from what happened around 2000, 2007, 2008, and then more recently with COVID, it's a reminder that these cycles happen. You don't know what's going to trigger it, what's going to happen, and certainly when I try to share perspective on how the fund is doing, especially with my counterparts in other parts of government, this past year, and it wasn't a bad thing, but we did some more benefit enhancement because the fund is in good shape. A couple of years ago, well, more than a couple of years ago, it's about 10 years ago, there was a new tier established with lower benefits. Most of the employees now in the state government and local government are in this latest tier, not as generous. And there's been a real push from our friends in labor, but also from some in management to say, we need to do better to retain and attract employees. So we did a benefit enhancement this year. The legislature did. I don't decide that. The legislature and the government do. But that there's a cost to that, right? So the challenge right now is we're enhancing benefits. Yeah, we're well funded and we're making money, but we're also paying out more. I mean, the last quarter, we paid out about $4.2 billion in benefits. So, the good news here, Bob, is we're all living into our 90s these days.
That's right.
But, from the perspective of a pension fund, that means our payouts are going to be a lot longer. People who are retiring more recently, and we've had an acceleration of retirements coming out of COVID, their pensions are higher than the folks that retired, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So the lesson for me is, while we're prudent managers and we're in good shape now, it's really to keep reminding everybody being good isn't static, right? So we still have to be at the top of our game with manager selection, getting good results, but others have to understand that anytime you change the equation, let's say with benefit enhancement, you potentially could be undercutting that strong funded status. So, and that's kind of a tough message to get out there, especially to our friends who only want to hear good news. And everybody would like to see benefits to be enhanced, of course. So I think that's one of the challenges I have coming out of all of these major events is not only managing the fund, but trying to explain to the larger world out there what it is we're trying to do, that this is not magic. This is hard work, and there are a lot of pressures, competing needs that we're trying to balance, and at the same time keep the plan well funded. And that's where, and I'll end on this, when I've got to go back to the employers and say, I've got to raise the contribution rate, and I'm going to do that this year, not by a lot, but by a bit, even though we had a good year. People are going to say, well, how come you well, I have to raise it because there's been a benefit enhancement. Our payouts are growing. The payrolls that you negotiate for employees are getting higher, which is a good thing, again, coming out of COVID, but that dries up the costs that our actuary has to factor in. So being the one to try to explain all this, that's a big challenge. And so trying to have people understand the big macro things that are happening, and then how that impacts on our day-to-day work. That's an ongoing challenge for me.
Yeah. So Tom, let me dive into a more sensitive subject, especially in today's climate. So as you've seen in the papers, there's been a lot of pushback on diversity, equity, and inclusion. There have been lawsuits that have been thrown around at various institutions, whether they be academic institutions or, small venture capital funds. But you have stayed the course. Not only have you been, I would describe you and your administration as a strong proponent of DEI. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you've done a lot there. You are outspoken around your beliefs around DEI. I've seen you say that to friendly audiences and maybe not so friendly audiences around this. Give me your sense of where we are today and how you as a leader are going to approach this going forward in the face of, what potentially could be more resistance than we've seen around this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big concern. And it is unfortunate that we've come to this point where, whether you're talking about DEI, you're talking about ESG, as well, these acronyms have become, rallying cries for a political agenda, and unfortunately, it's scared and confused a lot of people. I often get asked, just by folks out there, go to a retiree meeting, what is this DEI? Are you in DEI investing? And you try to explain to people that what we're really trying to do is have as much access to the best investment opportunities that we can possibly have. We have found that diversity has been a strength. Our fund, again, because it's big and it's been around a long time, we had many long-term relationships. But the reality is, when we have chosen with our emerging manager program and something with a broader MWBE program, we have had now an exposure to new managers, new markets that have served us well. I mean, when you look at the numbers, you could certainly say that the diverse managers in our portfolio perform as well, or in many cases better, than traditional relationships. And I have to say, and Bob, this, when we do let's say we do an investment with a Black-owned firm, a woman-owned firm, Hispanic-owned firm, whichever category, they're not getting extra points. They go through the same due diligence as we would for any investment. And when we give money to a diverse manager, if they don't perform, they don't stay on our roster of managers. So, there's the same kind of rigorous effort, but by seeking out diverse managers, the exposure to niche markets that we weren't exposed to before. When you're dealing, especially with emerging managers, these are the newer, younger, hungry firms that are really looking to prove them. So that they're going to be the next big firms down the road. And our greatest joy is when we can have an emerging manager, seed them, and they do so well, they graduate into the main part of the portfolio. And so, from my perspective, the diversity is a huge strength. I won't get into, unless you want to. We also, on the corporate governance side, particularly with our public holdings, are very committed to diversity on corporate boards, diversity in the workplace, because we believe that's an important part of human resources management. And if you're not looking like the communities you're serving, if you're not looking like America, you're just gonna miss out on so many opportunities. And obviously there have been many cases of categories of people not being treated fairly in the workplace, and that's, it's not a good investment, to be invested in a company that has a whole series of discrimination suits or questions about how racial minorities, gender minorities, sexual orientation go down the list. We're doing a lot now on disability inclusion, working with Ted Kennedy Jr. and the American Association of People with Disabilities, because there's a whole talent pool of disabled people that are underrepresented in the workforce. This is all about strengthening, the companies we invest in. So no, we're not shying from it. We're moving forward because it's been the strength of our fund, and I feel in New York, as opposed to some other places, I think there's great support among the public for what we're doing.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I do, Tom, want to talk about your corporate program. So let me frame it for the audience. New York Common is one of the biggest shareholders of public equity in the world, right? You own a lot of stock. You have a lot, and with that stock comes a lot of influence as you vote your shares of common stock. You have long since had a program that identifies the key issues within each company, and you all make decisions on whether it's management CEOs or whether it's governance policies. Talk about how you think about the issues that you are given choice on, and how you execute your strategy on what you will support and what you won't support.
Well, it gets back to staff. Again, we've really grown our corporate governance staff, and those are the individuals that play such an important role in monitoring companies and helping us implement our agenda. So every year, we update our proxy voting guidelines. We are always looking for information about companies, as well. We do the annual MWB survey. So shout out to Lennox Park Solutions for being a great partner, helping us identify, within our own, portfolio where there are companies that need to do a better job. And then, again, because we're invested in thousands of companies, obviously we have to make certain choices about where we might put an emphasis. But one of our key priorities has been at the corporate board level, because I really think unless you have a diverse management team at the top, that's where the tone of all the corporations is set. So particularly, for women board of directors, we work again in coalitions with organizations like 30% Coalition, which really has been very successful. You have more women on boards of directors than you've had in a long period of time. In the aftermath of the George Floyd killing, we also put more of an emphasis on diversity as far as race and ethnicity. So as an example, to your point in terms of voting, we will vote against boards of directors that don't have diverse membership. Obviously, women been for a long time one of our priorities, but now if you don't have a Black or Hispanic as well, now some may say, "Oh, you're being arbitrary." No, I think unless you start to say we're expecting to see diversity, not just folks talking about it, and we're going to express our concern by voting against slates that don't have diverse managers, I think that's how you make the difference. I mean, Black women particularly are severely underrepresented. I think one of the numbers I saw of top companies with boards, I think it was only about 4% Black women on board. So there's a lot of catch up we need to do, and I think you don't effectuate change in the workplace unless you set the right tone at the top, and that starts with the boards of directors. Amazon become a big part of all of our lives, especially after COVID. There have been a lot of headline issues about particularly warehouse workers of color, how they were treated. We filed a shareholder resolution on Amazon for them to do an independent racial equity audit to really get to the question of how are their employees of color being treated. We lost that on a vote, although we got over 40% the first time we put it in. But it brought them to the table, and they agreed to do a racial equity audit headed by Loretta Lynch, former U.S. Attorney General. And that, I think, is close to conclusion now. So, and that's the other thing we see is that when we press a company, when we engage, let's say by writing a letter or doing a meeting or doing a shareholder resolution, it often will prompt a conversation that can result, maybe not in a vote. Sometimes it results in a vote, but it can often result in an agreement. We may not get 100% of what we're looking for, but if we get 90% and it moves it forward, we'll withdraw that shareholder resolution. And we've had a lot of success in this area. We don't do it alone. Obviously we have other large funds, particularly our New York City counterparts, California. I'd say that New York City, New York State, California, probably the ones that are best known for corporate governance work. But we think this is very important. And look, American society is wonderful, but it's not a perfect society yet. And so there's so much more we need to do. And my experience has been inclusion and equity and diversity is a strength. And I think the numbers show it. It's interesting right now when you look at our externally managed portfolio, 24% being managed by diverse managers. Mm-hmm. That's great, and that's part of why we have those strong numbers. And when we I think, as you know, because you've heard me say it in other forums, what we're doing is it's not the ceiling. It's really the floor. We keep growing it. So, we're about at close to 37 billion in MWBE, about 11 billion in emerging managers. Not all of those are MWBE, but a significant portion are. We're going to do more. I'm glad you mentioned Sylvester McLaren. He's heading the program now, and he's looking for more opportunities. And so I certainly hope one thing that'll come out of this conversation is that some of the folks that are watching will reach out to Sylvester, tell us what you have. As you know, we do every February. We have our Emerging Manager MWB conference in Albany, part of Black and Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Caucus Weekend. We do that on the Friday going into that weekend, where we have people come meet with our staff, meet with many of our investment managers, our program managers that manage our EM program. Because, as you know, Bob, it's about relationships, about knowing who to talk to, knowing whose phone number to get. And I always say to folks, talking to us doesn't guarantee a yes, but at least we get you in the door. And if you've got a great investment opportunity and it fits in with what we're looking for in terms of our asset allocation and our needs, we have proven that we are very anxious for new and lasting relationships as well.
Tom, there's a bit of a circular impact on the investing that you and that the New York City plan does as it relates to New York City real estate. Talk a little bit about, perhaps, and I don't want to go too deep into the policy, but we're in an environment where real estate is changing. How we use real estate, how we think about it. Where is New York Common positioned, both from an asset allocation, but what your beliefs are these days around the real estate market?
Well, real estate, again, is we've upped it. We're now at about 12% is our long-term policy allocation. Housing is such a big issue, and you hear about it all the time. The challenge for us as a pension fund, though, is the obvious one. We need to make money, right? So, some of the efforts to make housing more affordable, would limit the amount of return you're going to get. So I have to say, Bob, it's been a little more challenging than I wish it would be, to find opportunities that both can advance housing opportunities and still meet our criteria. That being said, we have done more in terms of workforce housing and affordable housing in recent years than we've done for a while. I've said to the staff, and I have to say, many of our real estate committee members say the same thing. We need to do more in this area. We've had a long-term relationship with the Community Preservation Corps, which focuses on not only building affordable housing, but rehabbing existing housing for lower income people. That's been a long-term investment relationship. So I think this is an area where we're trying to do more. I'm hoping we can do more, but it is a challenge. I would not be, full disclosure if I didn't say that's a challenge for us. And keep in mind, when we invest real estate, we're not just investing in New York.
Right.
It's across the U.S.
No, that's right.
Sometimes, frankly, in other markets, sometimes it's easier, to come up with a number that works and provide affordable. But because the New York prices are just so high, I mean, that's really the challenge for us.
So as you think about your career, 17 years and hopefully, many more to come, there are always things that we wish we had a do-over on, a mulligan, an opportunity to change it. Anything come to mind that you wish that you could have done differently over the course of those 17 years?
Well, obviously, I wish COVID never happened, but I can't take responsibility.
We're not going to blame that on you.
I think, it's hard to answer because, I think the strength of where we're at, and I appreciate your very kind comments. A lot of it has to do with the fact that I've been sticking with it, and there's been a consistency of effort and constancy of effort over time. I guess what would I have liked to have done some of it faster, sooner, quicker, more boldly. Perhaps. Could we have gotten to some of these numbers, 5, 10 years ago? Maybe. Um, but it's hard to second guess that, you know. And I think the biggest challenge with any organization, right, is attracting and retaining the right people. And obviously I won't go into names, but
Mhm.
99% I made the right decisions in terms of who we brought in. Maybe this 1% probably should have done it different. That doesn't apply to any of the people whose names we mentioned,
Right.
by the way. So yeah, I mean, there isn't little. There's very little, I would say. I would do over. Maybe I wish. Because I'm kind of cautious by nature. Maybe that's a good thing for someone who's a trustee of people's retirement
Yeah.
funds. But maybe a self-criticism is moving a little quicker. On some of these points might have still worked out. But I feel good about where we've ended up and where we're going. There's still a lot of work to do. It's a very dynamic environment out there. There are a lot of challenges out there, not only in terms of investment, but the whole political environment is a challenge. You alluded to it. We didn't have time to talk about it, but that whole ESG agenda, of which DEI is a piece of, obviously, is really under attack in very significant ways. Coming out of Washington, and a lot's at stake this November. And I'm obviously hoping we're going to see the American people make the better choices this year and start to change some of the discussion that I think has ultimately been harmful. And what I most want to see is our autonomy to be protected in New York. Maybe not everybody in other parts of the country want to do it the way we do it, but don't infringe on my ability to do it the way it's worked for us in New York. And ultimately, for me, I mean, it is kind of a strange structure, but I'm elected. I mean, I do have an ultimate level of accountability, to the people. So if when I run again, the people still choose me, then give me the autonomy to do the kind of approach on investment that we've had that's worked well for us, and leave me out of all the
Right.
all the political rhetoric that to me is very harmful and hurtful and not based on fact.
Yeah. Tom, I've only got a couple more questions as we begin to wrap up, but I've watched you over the years. I've criticized at times, I've admired at others, but we've had an amazing working relationship. And it often makes me wonder where we get the next Thomas DiNapolis, right? Where we get people like you in the future. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of public service and in particular public leadership?
Yeah, well, I'm sure the next time DiNapoli will be even better than this one. But look, there's been so many comparisons, right? This year, just having been in Chicago, about 1968, and I've been reading a lot of books about 19. I was, freshman, sophomore in high school then, and for me, all these years later, what was happening, who the leaders were, the leaders who were silenced in very violent ways, that's really what had the big impact on me. And so what I would say, to our younger people who are looking at the landscape out there, sometimes they're a little harder to find perhaps today, but there are heroes and there are role models out there. I'm not saying I'm one of them, but have a sense of positivity about the ability to make change through the public process, through the government process, through politics.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always easy. It's not always pretty. You're not going to like everybody, even on your own side. But, American democracy only works if people are at the table. Mm-hmm. And if you feel you're being, what did Shirley Chisholm say? If they don't invite you to the table, bring your own folding chair and sit there anyway. There's so much at stake at a very local level, at a national level. Just get involved. And for people who are interested in finance and investing, as we've been talking, you don't have to run for office. I mean, for me, that was the path. But, the ability of investments and capital to move markets and then to move the broader society. I mean, I think one of the challenges, we've done very well with investing with diverse managers, but one of the challenges that I've put out to staff and even to some of our managers, so besides investing with diverse managers, and I think you were getting at it to a bit with the housing question, what are we doing to make sure our capital is having an impact at the neighborhood level?
Mhm.
And for for diverse communities, especially communities perhaps have been left behind. So having people in the investment world that understand about investment strategies that can move a positive agenda forward for the country, and giving back. I mean, I think that's a lot of what it is. I mean, for me, giving back, I obviously I haven't made a lot of money in my life doing public service for so long. Giving back is what I'd like to think I do every day with public service. But if you're very successful, let's say in the finance end, what non-for-profit are you going to be, chairman of the board of, chairperson, chairwoman, whatever? Where are you going to put your philanthropy? You look at a guy like Robert Smith, who's built an incredible business with a lot of support from New York Common, I might add.
A lot of support.
Look at the ways in which he's given back to the larger community.
Yeah.
So I would say, look to the Robert Smith as a role model. I don't know if he's interested in running for office. He's not living in New York, so he can't run for New York State Controller. So that's a good thing for me. But but be involved in the public sphere in some way. Politics, whatever your party, nonprofit service, and if you're in a company or a corporation or you're an investor, how can you make that capital work towards a positive change? And I believe organically, the next level of leadership will evolve. They're out there. I have a lot of, I meet a lot of younger people. I don't worry that the talent's not out there. I worry that the talent is turned off, because of the way the environment is these days. But you know what? I have a feeling 2024 is one of those years where people are starting to have a different attitude. Yeah. And I think young people are starting to drop in, not drop out now. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. When you think about John F. Kennedy's challenge to the nation and ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And you think about all that we've gone through as a society since World War II, frankly, right? Yeah. It has to turn in a way that is inclusive of more of us, because so many of us are proud of our country. So many of us, love what the nation stands for. But with that, I'm going to let that be the last word, Tom. Thank you so much for your generosity, for sharing your time. Thank you so much for your leadership. Thank you, obviously, for what you've done for the people of New York. But selfishly, thank you so much for what you've done for the NAIC and our members. I could run down a list of folks that you guys have invested with. I think they've made you or made the people of New York a lot of money. But it's a partnership that we respect and we appreciate. And on behalf of all of them, and on behalf of our chairman, he would get on me if I didn't, Joseph Haslip, thank you so much for working with us and for all you do, Tom.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you to NAIC. We appreciate and value the partnership.
As do we. Be well, Tom. I'll see you soon.
Thanks.
Bye.